Hello and welcome to Dialogue. At the beginning of September, China implemented new rules to further prevent gaming addiction among children by slashing the time they can spend playing online video games to only 3 hours per week. Will the new rule really help? Who will implement it? And why has the government felt it necessary to step in to help battle game addiction? To discuss these questions and more, I'm glad to be joined today by Zhang Miao, partner at the KPMG legal network firm, Li Wenhao, a gaming enthusiast, Andy Mock, senior research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, and Dr. Edward Kwan, medical advisor to the Hong Kong Junior Police Officers Association. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Okay, let's start with Zhang Miao. Miao, please explain to us exactly what the new rule is, who it is targeted to, and why the government feels these rules are necessary.
Okay, the new rule actually was published by the National Press and Publication Administration. We will call it NPPA. So the new rule basically has two aspects. The first aspect is it puts restrictions on gaming companies to provide gaming services to teenagers with a time restraint. Basically, it's going to be no more than 1 hour from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and also public holidays. So that's the time restriction. And then secondly, it asks all the gaming companies to actually connect to the anti-addiction system, which it requires real name, real username authentication or registration to the system operated by the NPPA. I think it's targeting at protecting the children from getting addicted to playing games. Basically, that helps them in terms of their overall health, as well as now focusing on their study, as well as all the other real life relationships.
Now, Wenhao, you describe yourself as a gaming enthusiast. About how many hours per week would you say that's proper to play online games? And also personally, when did you start to pick up this gaming as a hobby? Did your parents support you?
I think my gaming history going way back from middle school when my family had its first on computer. And at the time, my parents are just like most parents nowadays believe the games are only for kids. But if I remember correctly, my parents also played card games or some other games on the computer too. But eventually I found a balance with my parents so I can play games occasionally as a reward after my study. So that was my experience with gaming.
Do you feel like you have suffered any, let's say, negative effects as a result of gaming, playing the game in particular? Play game for a long time, such as you probably spend too much time, and then you have less time on your homework or on your study.
I would say not really, because I wouldn't describe myself as addicted to games where I skipped schools or I didn't do any class to play the games. I did join playing game after I have a really long time of study or a really long day of work. So where I can have a relaxation or I can just escape from the reality for a moment so I can enjoy myself in these games to release the stress. So after that, I can put myself together for another day. And I also was taught in the family to spend money wisely, so I wouldn't have that many of this kind of negative influences on playing the games. And for me, playing the game is always about its art design or inner story or its unique mechanism. It's not always about winning. So that's why I wasn't really that much addicted to the games. But I would say if I can spend more times outside doing exercise, it might be more helpful for my health. But overall, it's fine for me.
It seems you have a very balanced understanding or very balanced way of playing games, doing your homework. But I wonder, what's your perspective on the government's regulation, basically to restrict the play time to 3 hours a week, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday?
Yeah. The regulation itself doesn't really have a much impact on me or on my experience on gaming because I'm already an adult, and also I play games on multiple platforms like PC or like consoles and stuff. So as an adult, I'm not facing this regulation at all directly. But if you really have to say some kind of impact, it might be the fact that on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, you have 1 hour where all the teenagers rush into the games. That might cause a server crackdown. That might affect my experience. And from my point of view, I think the regulation itself is too general. And I think the society is still under the stereotype that the games are mostly played or designed for the underage teenagers. But the games are facing multiple players at the time. Not only teenagers, adults also can be easily attracted to the games or even be addicted to the games. So you need to understand that with the technology nowadays, it's easy for different people to get access to the games, and even the elderly can play games on their mobile phone. And the games are designed to be interesting. So eventually there will be a percent of people that are very small percent of people are with less discipline that are going to be addicted to games. So for the teenagers, I think it's more important for the parents, schools, and the society to help them to not be addicted to games. For example, schools can tell them something about the internet. Parents can sit down with the kids more or with some kind of psychological guidance. And the society should be offering more opportunities or this kind of access to the extra curricular activities like outside basketball court or some sort. So the kids can actually have a place to go rather than going back home from schools, stay at home, and the parents are away from work. So all they can do is facing a screen and then start playing games.
Mm-hmm. Well, Andy, obviously, not everybody agrees with the new regulations. In particular, some would say, whether the kids should be allowed to play game 1 hour, 2 hour, how long and when, is really the responsibility of the parents. And why some would say, why should the government step in to intervene in how long the children should play or when they should play the game?
No, that's a really great question. Before I answer that, let me just briefly provide a bit of context on why I do think the government's new policies is a smart decision. So my first computer was an Apple II Plus, where the data input was not even a floppy disk, but a cassette player. So this shows you how old I am. And I first video games that was text-based. So you typed in words and got a response. So that was the state of gaming when I started. So the difference here, and this sounds very controversial, it's like heroin. So heroin 20, 30 years ago was not anywhere near as addictive as the heroin today. Because if we look at games today, they are very deliberately designed with enormous resources poured into how to make people click one more time, play one more time. So I think this is a concern. Now, when we look at it from the government's perspective, it makes me think of Singapore. So many people, especially in the West, have complained about Singapore as this quote unquote nanny state. But on the other hand, I think the optics and the signaling is incredibly important. So for example, in Singapore, you can be fined, you can get in trouble for, people joke about chewing gum or crossing the street against a red light. And does the government really need to do that? In a very practical way, perhaps not. But from a signaling perspective, this is saying this is what society values, this is what society cares about. And that does have an influence on parents and other members of society as well. So I do think we'll probably get into some of the technical aspects of how do you implement regulations like this. But I think just as importantly is the signaling or the optics to let everyone know what society, what government considers important and what people should pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's bring in Edward. So Edward, in 2018, the World Health Organization listed video game addiction as mental disorder. So tell us, in play games or, addicted to play gaming, this is different thing, obviously. So what's the, definition for addiction?
Well, there are a lot of definition, with slight variation, but I can mention a few main construct or main concept behind this concept of addiction. First is loss of control. When someone playing from 2 hours to 5 hours to 10 hours, you can consider that as a measure of loss of control in terms of time spent or time play. The second main construct is damage. When someone is addicted, we consider there must be some damage either to that individual player, to the interpersonal relationship in the family context, or even to the degree of illegal activities. Because some of the game played by young people, can ascend to another level where you need to spend real money to buy pawns, to buy weapons, that sort of things. So when and where that boundary is crossed is a problem. The third main construct behind addiction is chasing. It's a kind of habitual behavior. After you lose a game or you cannot achieve a success in breaking a level, then our human nature would try to achieve something. Then you start chasing. So these are the few common construct behind the activity or the problem we call addiction, mainly loss of control, damage, chasing, and another main construct is the kind of dependence. Whenever you break away from that activity and you feel frustrated, you feel you have a kind of bad mood, you don't feel happy, that is a kind of dependence, which is a kind of precondition before addiction.
Well, Edward, I know you work as the medical advisor to the Hong Kong Junior Police Officers Association. Tell us, from your experience, how serious some of the cases could be, in particular to the young kids.
Well, actually, I have a lot of cases. They are addicted gambler, and they have a prehistory of playing video game for 5 to 10 years before they get into early adulthood. So my worry is looking at the spectrum from playing video game and shifting to the pole of addiction. And that is my main worry, And of course, there are some teenage, underage, they are in a less advantage in terms of parental control. They are more in need of sensation seeking, excitement, or they need what just Wan Ho mentioned, escape from reality. Then this type of teenage or under 18, they are less advantaged and they are more prone to dependency and addiction. So in my case, I think I have to look at the case, at their family history, at their behavior before they get into serious problem of addiction of gambling before.
Well, it's closely related sometimes, gaming and gambling, some kind of the games could be basically turned into gambling. That's a more serious issue now. And so Zhao Miao here, if you look at this legal, from the legal perspective, people argue, well, children also have the rights to, basically enjoy the games. That's one of the sources for joy and entertainment. And also people would ask, what's the legal basis or foundation for the government to take such a move, which is quite restrictive, to be frank, and to limit the children's time to play games?
Well, everybody's right has to be within certain restrictions. For example, if we are talking about the government, especially, the international world has this habit of accusing Chinese government of probably overstepping or kind of having too much power or step into individuals' kind of freedom. However, for this one, if you look at the recent US case, how about the very long history of debate about, women's abortion rights? And recently, a Texas case actually gave everyone, even if they are irrelevant to the abortion itself, the right to, file a legal suit against any doctors or anyone such as a Uber driver who actually may assist in abortion. So if you compare that kind of intrusion into individuals' rights versus, why Chinese government or regulators or lawmakers is trying to kind of put restrictions on, young children playing games too much, I think, it's obvious when it doesn't work, when we put the kind of obligation on children to be self-disciplined or put the burden on the parents to do, more close monitoring of their kids, it still doesn't work. So we need regulators to put heavy restrictions on the game providers. It's going to be a joint effort from all parties to, make the children's growing environments more healthy, more sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Well, Andy, you are from the United States, so obviously, I guess, parents in China, in the US, in the UK, anywhere in the world would feel more or less the same in terms of the concern about the health of their children. For example, playing, too much game somehow, sometimes maybe it's not healthy, and also probably it is somehow disrupting their homework, for example. That's kind of similar. It's really up to the government, different governments, whether they are going to take an action like a regulation to intervene.
No, absolutely. And I think also we need to recognize that video games are, I think, recognized as not, if not definitely harmful, but potentially harmful. And we see around the world how governments and societies regulate these potentially harmful activities and substances. So think about alcohol. Many countries around the world have restrictions on how old you have to be to drink. Think about tobacco. Think about other types of activities, even let's say gambling as well. So many parts of the world that have legalized gambling also have restrictions on how old you have to be to participate. So I think that's one point. Another point that is perhaps a silver lining to this policy, and I've talked to friends in the US who wish the US could do something similar, because we all know that we can argue legitimately that this is the parents' responsibility ultimately. But we also know that many parents are busy. They may have other constraints that keep them from being as good a parent as they would like. And by having this government action that kind of takes care of this work for them, I think that many parents see this as a positive. And a more subtle point is, especially for parents in places like the US that care a lot, maybe perhaps too much, about having their children like them. Because we need to recognize that responsibility as a parent sometimes means doing things your children do not like. But in the US, many parents want to be liked by their children. And this gives them an excuse. Hey, it's not me that's not letting you play video games, it's the government. So there are some perhaps unexpected benefits from a policy like this.
That's, of course, somehow like ease the burden of the parents. Another issue related to is really the implementation of those regulations. Wen Hao, I know obviously you understand a lot about the playing games here. With real name registration, with the limit of time, how much longer you can play for the kids, 3 hours a week. Do you think it's easy to implement those rules? Or someone would point out that young kids are resourceful. They can always find a way to get around these rules.
Yes, I definitely agree that, because you already see in some games records showing that somebody's 65 years of grandma already played 5 games in a row on the system, because the kids just using their grandparents' IDs to get around to cheat the system. So I would say if it's just like a 3 hours rule, the kids always find a way to get around it. And especially, it's not really that good for the experience. Imagine one kid just playing the game for an hour, and in the middle of one team fight or something, and the system just automatically log off the kids. And the kids must just want to go back to the game so eagerly. So there must be some actions being done by this kind of kids as well. So generally, I don't think this simple regulations can get kids out of the playing games.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's another question, obviously facing the parents as well as the government. And so, Edward, here, if you look at the games, obviously, at least some of them, they are well designed to produce this very positive feedback. So that's part of the reason why children love those games, right? And some would say if you take away the games from the children, somehow there will be a void in positive reinforcement in children. Are you worried about that?
No, I don't have such worry. Of course, some of the games, sophisticated one, they are designed by behavioral analysts, psychologists, and statisticians. So I think those games are more addictive to some teenage. To those teenage, there may be a void, but I think that void, if you label that kind of dissatisfaction as a void, I think there are many other activities that can fill up that void. And I think that 3 hours a week, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and national holiday, I think that there is a possibility, this interest to play video game, maybe in the long run would come to an extinction. And as Wan Ho mentioned, 1 hour to play a day is hard to reach a level of satisfaction, not to mention saturation. So I would say this is a very upstream, daring, and decisive policy to protect underage, under 18. I have no worry whether this kind of void would be filled up by healthy sports, playing basketball, volleyball, badminton, table tennis, you name it. So I think there could be a phenomenon of displacement, moving kids away from screen to sport ground, reducing screen time to social time. And I hope this new policy would bring in that kind of positive output or outlook for the young generation in China in the next 5 or 10 years to come. I think any measure, anti-addiction measure, we are looking at a time span of 5 or 10 years. We are not just looking at a few months or 1 or 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, another perspective, some people would say, well, Andy, you're in the business, they would say, oh, that will have some impact on the Chinese gaming industry, which is important, create jobs, create revenue. Some say, the children, their potential users actually pick up the hobby as children. If you have such restrictions, they would lose some consumers in the future. That would damage their business. Are you concerned with that?
Well, I think this is a complex question, but I want to quickly go back to this thought of, because children, teenagers can get around rules like this, does that mean it's a bad rule? I think any rule, any law can be broken. And that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't have it, because it still shapes people's behavior. You have certain groups that will say, well, because it is the rule, it is the law, I will obey it. Others will say, well, if it's hard to break the law, I won't. And then, of course, there always will be a few, the rebels, that will find a way to break a law because that's just what they enjoy doing. And I think it's within this context that we can also understand the future of gaming. In that, in a lot of ways, I think it is like the alcohol industry, the tobacco industry, that you always want to start your customers as young as possible, hoping you will have them for life. And it's also like these industries in that there is at least some potential harm to certain people. So if you do have an addictive personality that makes you vulnerable to drugs, to alcohol, to games, to shopping, maybe even to work, that this certainly is an issue. So I think that it is an industry that is more attention is being paid from a regulatory perspective, including limits on how long kids can play, but other regulations as well that I won't be surprised if we see more and more rules around this, because we have to recognize that online gaming is a relatively new industry and it is very, very powerful. As Edward mentioned, there are psychologists, there are all kinds of analysts whose jobs all day is to figure out how to make people keep playing. So in this way, we can see this as a kind of a quote unquote sin business that might need a bit more regulation.
Mm-hmm. I think you already mentioned that, at least some of the games, they are designed to be addictive. Once you play it, and it will somehow, you will stick to it, and it's very difficult to get rid of such a hobby or habit. That is probably the parents, why worried about that. And also, esports is big in China. Andy, some say, esports, you have to, professionals often they develop as a child, very, very young age. Do you think such kind of restrictions somehow will impact that kind of sports?
I think it certainly potentially could. And again, I think this is exactly what makes this a complex issue, because on the one hand, we do see that online gaming has acquired a certain amount of legitimacy as a sport, as esports. We also see, though, that it can be bad for people with addictive personalities. So maybe one example we can use is poker. So we can see poker is gambling. It's illegal in many places. It's regulated in others. And yet there are professional poker players who compete, make their living entirely playing poker. So I see that probably where we're going with this is that it will be a legitimate profession, a legitimate sport activity, but it will also be subject to a certain amount of laws, regulations, and even norms, societal norms about what is appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess, briefly, you are for the regulations, I guess, or you are against the regulation. Starting with John Miao, let's say.
I'm definitely for the regulation.
Andy.
I think it should have more strict implementation measures as well, such as whistleblowing system for all the parents to be able to report, certain companies not following the rules, putting the right restrictions in place.
You want more restrictions on that, right? In terms of implementation. Yes. Okay.
Exactly.
Wen Hao.
I can't really say I'm for or against because it's targeting a teenager, which is quite irrelevant to me. But I do think the government should have a thorough considerations of how exactly they want to let kids play the game safely, which this can be in whether you create a game rating system that helps people playing better games, and there should be also some kind of a regulation where you restricted the in-app advertisement. All these kind of factors could be the ones that affecting the users or the gaming experiences. And if it's a positive gaming experience, we can see definitely it's gonna help the kids to learn more. Because for my personal experience, I learn English, I learn a lot of things from the games.
To refine the system. Very briefly, just like Edward, are you for or against the rules, the new rules?
Well, for the well-being and mental health of the young generation in China, I'm for the regulation.
I think I also get Andy's response from that, obviously. Well, thank you, Andy, and all the guests for your insights and for your time. That's all from us for today. Okay, thank you for watching. See you next time.